Hello, gang. Tattooed Biker here with you. And tonight, I've got something really special lined up for you. Now, I know I usually handle reports and true encounter stories involving cryptid creatures, but I still do occasionally receive paranormal reports and ghost stories, which I really do enjoy. And as a Halloween special edition episode, I'm going to read my three very favorite ghost stories that I've ever received. And no worries, I won't be ruining the mood by popping in with a lot of narrator's notes in this one. No, I'm just going to read these exactly the way I received these true stories. And you better load your saddlebags. It's going to be a long one. Now grab your gear and let's ride.
Number 1. Dear Biker, so let me start out by saying that I enjoy writing, so this will be quite long. It is nonfiction though, but will hopefully be an interesting read. I also admit that I have absolutely no memory of this experience. I was a little over 2 years old, and just starting to walk on my own when this event took place. My mom only told me this story around 3 years ago, when I was 32 and about to get married. Now, my mom was raised in a very tiny, fundamentalist Christian community and had no belief in the paranormal whatsoever. She believed that our souls sleep until Judgment Day or something like that. Ergo, there are no ghosts or spirits that haunt houses. Even over 30 years later, she still sounded terrified as she told me this story. This woman, who always talks way too loud, was literally whispering by the end of it. And she was white as a sheet. I believed her completely and still do. My mom never talks about stuff like this, and I'm just glad that I can't remember it. In 1988, my parents had their second child. This was my brother Victor. We were very crowded in our rented flat with 2 babies, and my parents decided to move into a rambling old 2-story farmhouse on a 7-acre plot in southern Ohio, for more room for the family. It was way out in the sticks and took almost an hour to get to town from there. My mom said that the first time I saw the house, I freaked out. I was crying and saying things like, "Don't like the mean house, don't like, scary house mama, don't like." My mom says that this behavior was very out of character for me, but I stopped complaining about the house after a few weeks. So she just chalked it up to the stress of the move. Now, this house was ramshackle and in the middle of nowhere. The kitchen was at the far rear of the house, and until recently, before we moved in, still had an ancient wood-burning cooking stove against the back wall. This had caught the back wall on fire a few months before we moved in, and it caused a lot of damage. A lot of this damage wasn't fixed yet, so my young, broke parents got a very cheap rent agreement. Gotta love the 1980s. On the second floor, directly above the kitchen, was a locked room. The landlord claimed that it had heavy fire damage, but her son, who had done the repairs, claimed the only fire damage was in the kitchen since it had the worst and was beyond his skill level to fix. Either way, the landlord was adamant that the room was off limits, and my parents always respected that. I know all this because I heard stories about the crappy farmhouse with the creepy door my whole life, and there were pictures of us in and around that farmhouse. The locked door was right next to the upstairs landing, so there was no avoiding it, and both my parents have told me that it gave them the creeps. A few months after we moved in, my mom and I were in the yard with our pit Doberman mix, Boss. She was hanging laundry, and I was rolling around with the dog. She said that just as she noticed that everything was way too quiet, Boss started going crazy from surprisingly far away. About 500 yards from the house and down on the left, there was a small duck pond, and Boss was in between the two, running towards my mom, and then turning and running back towards the pond, barking frantically the whole time. That's when my mom saw something thrashing around in the middle of the pond. She took off towards the water full speed. Boss beat her there and drugged me out of the water himself. Thank you, Pupper. Although my mom was confused how I got so far so fast and how I got into the center of the pond since it was over my head and I couldn't swim. She figured that she underestimated me and brought in the baby gates and playpens. I was to be contained from that point forward. Well, a few weeks later, she was cooking downstairs and Boss was outside. Victor asleep in his crib, and I was in my playpen in my room upstairs. I also had a gate on my door and one at the top of the stairs. The stairs ran up from the side of the kitchen, so my mom said she could listen for us crying or fussing while she cooked. My mom said no longer than 15 minutes after the last time she looked in on us kids, Boss starts going crazy again out in the yard. She runs up to check on us. Victor's still sleeping. Every baby gate is still shut and locked, but I'm not in my room. A frenzied search reveals that I'm not in the house at all. A sudden image of Boss saving me from drowning caused my mom to rush outside to see what he's trying to tell her this time. She said that he was running circles around the yard, barking uncontrollably. When she gets outside, he took off towards the right, away from the pond. He would run ahead, turn around, and then bark at my mother, waiting for her to catch up a little before racing off again. He ended up leading her almost 1.5 miles out onto the dirt road that separated our property from our neighbors. He led her to a thick stand of trees on our neighbor's side of a rocky drive. She said that what hit her first was the foul stench of advanced decay. She plowed into those trees with her heart in her throat and her stomach full of ice. She said that she noticed many piles of corrugated tin, tarps, tires, and other debris. The smell was coming strongly from these junkyard items. Peeking under a sheet of tin, she discovered the extremely decomposed corpse of a butchered cow. As she headed deeper into the thicket, where the tree cover was denser, she said less care was taken to cover the remains. Grisly pieces of bones and rotting chunks of bovine littered the area. Apparently, our neighbor, in an effort to cheat his taxes, had been illegally slaughtering cattle and then hiding the remains in the thicket of trees. She found me in the dead center of this thicket, just standing there, looking around like I was confused, surrounded by all this carnage. She said that I didn't seem scared or anything, just standing there. She rushed over to me, and after ascertaining that I wasn't injured, she began questioning me on why I was there, how I got there. Now keep in mind that although my mom said that I started speaking very young, I still didn't have much of a vocabulary. She said that I told her, with that serious look that only small children can give, that the children brought me here. Shitting her pants at the thought that anyone, even children, could walk right past her through the kitchen, get me from upstairs, and then walk right back past her on the way down those stairs, and then out with me. She demanded to know what children and where the hell they are now. I looked at her, dead serious, and told her that the ones that live with us in the room at the top of the stairs, and that I didn't see them anymore. After a moment of stunned silence, she starts asking all kinds of questions about these children. However, she told me that I refused to say anything else. She said as long as she questioned me about what happened, I would just stand there staring at her with a serious expression and my mouth closed. She said this same pattern held true every time that she brought it up to me, so she was always left wondering and immediately began hounding my dad about moving closer to town. Now, while the incident with me getting to the pond was highly unlikely, it was at least remotely possible. Now, from my mom's point of view, she's adamant that me being out there that day was completely impossible. She says there's no way I could have even known it was out there, much less have the ability to open and relock the baby gates, get downstairs past her, and end up almost 2 miles down the road in this place in under 15 minutes. I was only 2 and as slow and clumsy as most toddlers are. As I said, she's still shaken up by it, even after 30 years. Personally, I have no idea what happened that day. I've thought about hypnosis, but haven't yet decided if I really want to remember. Maybe it's just better to let it be a mystery. Because whatever those things were, I really don't think they were children. Signed, Bobby. Number 2. Hey TB, I have a story to tell. You see, I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army and ETSing, or getting out from the military, when President Bush ordered more troops into Iraq back in 2003. I had just returned home to Austin, Texas, when I was summoned up into my local National Guard unit at Camp Mabry and told that I was being recalled to the Army, but the unit was already tasked out to deploy to Iraq. I wasn't part of their unit yet, so the commander offered to give me a waiver to deploy with a government contractor, Halliburton. I knew that I would make more money as a contractor, so I eagerly took the offer. Not long after arriving in Kuwait at Camp Doha, I began working with the operations team there, overseeing logistics and affairs. We would oversee the daily convoy of supply between Kuwait and Baghdad, a route riddled with IED incidents, small arms skirmishes, and almost constant breakdowns of Army and civilian vehicles. Because I was a saw gunner in the 1st Infantry Division while I was active duty, and technically still was in the Guard, I was often in the convoys, manning a mounted weapon that accompanied mostly civilian convoys. During these runs, as we called them, we had a few strange encounters in an area south of Baghdad, known then as Camp Babylon. Occupied by French troops, but then designated as an archaeological site for obvious reasons, Camp Babylon was set up in the area that was said to originally be inhabited by the famous Tower of Babel. Indeed, there were ruins there that did look like a massive structure had once stood at that spot. I had 2 strange incidents happen to me while I was passing through there. The first incident seems a bit benign now, but it sets the mood for the second. We were passing through Camp Babylon in the afternoon one day, when our convoy took small arms fire. The SOP at the time was to stop the convoy and then return fire. This was because in the past, such incidents ended up being a lone gunman attempting to scare the convoy into running into IEDs on the road. Because of this, the SOP changed to stop the convoy, dismount, and then return fire. While engineers looked for explosive devices along the road, we all scanned the horizon for the enemy. Nothing. They most likely fled immediately. However, the ruins around Camp Babylon were alive with shadow figures that seemed to dart around the area. Several times we would spot them, but they would immediately disappear. A contractor, lying beside me with his weapon, commented, "How odd that we're in the shadow of Babel and fighting the supernatural." I didn't respond, but I knew that he was a 32nd degree Mason who was really into the arcane aspects of Babylon. And I didn't feel at the time that very much was supernatural, but I certainly did see the shadowy figures darting around the structures. Once the road was deemed clear, then we continued on our way to Baghdad. The second incident occurred about a month later. At this point, the weather in southern Iraq and Kuwait had turned quite cold at night. During this encounter, we had just completed a supply run to Baghdad and were returning back to Camp Doha in Kuwait when a vehicle in our convoy broke down. Once again, we found ourselves right at Camp Babylon. While the Army mechanics took a look at the vehicle, the rest of us took up fighting positions around the area, and that's when strange things began to occur. It started with a strange light bobbing in the desert. Thinking it was a person with a flashlight, we used our night vision goggles to watch. It was simply a glowing ball of light moving towards a set of ruins. After initial contact with the light, a few of us had moved forward away from the convoy to try and see what the source was. After seeing that it was self-contained and not a person, we were quite a bit alarmed. Then we heard a sound that I'll never forget. A long wailing began from one of the ruined structures not too far away. It sounded like a woman in agony, mixed with intense loneliness. On and on the sounds went on while we huddled in the cold and the dark, wondering what the hell we were listening to. With our NVGs equipped, we used our flashlights to spotlight the ruins. If you've ever done this, you'll know what a normal flashlight with NVGs looks like a massive beam of light. We scoured the whole area, but found no source for the wails or the ball of light. Around this time, we were told via radio that the vehicle was repaired and ready to roll, so we decided to return to the convoy. I was just slinging my saw over my shoulder when I noticed my contractor partner was staring at the ruins in horror. He was frozen. I shook him, and he snapped out of his stupor, quickly leaving the area with the rest of us. Once we were back at the camp, and it was pleasantly daylight the following morning. A group of us were sitting around chatting about the encounter the previous night, before our daily operations briefing. It was then that I remembered the terrified expression on the face of the contractor. I took the opportunity to ask him about it. He was still obviously traumatized by the event, but managed to explain that as we were leaving our position on that sandy hill, he sees a tall, black figure standing beside the ruins. It was just standing there watching us as we were looking for him. He said that he felt an instant wave of despair hit him, and he thought in that moment that he was going to die. He didn't remember even leaving the area. His very next memory was in the Humvee, headed back to Kuwait. I'll never forget the wailing figure at the ruins of Babel. It's also worth noting that when I related this story to some of our Pakistani employees at Camp Doha and Camp Arafan, they were also quite horrified. One of them, a translator we called Artie, said that we had encountered a jinn, or a damned spirit, and that we were very lucky to have lived to tell the tale. Looking back, I have to agree. Signed, Daniel. Number 3. Dear Tattooed, back in the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help my brother and I become better men, and I have to say, I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures that many would never get to experience, and I'm thankful for every experience that life gave to me, even the scary ones. While we lived in Japan, my father wanted us to have a fully immersive experience, so he chose to move us into a small Japanese neighborhood off base. We lived in a little house at the top of an enormous hill, in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side a fairly large cemetery. Our particular house was set far above the monkey habitats, about a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats was nothing but thick, Indiana Jones-style jungle. Jungle the neighborhood kids and I would tromp through endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. We were the only American family living in that cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese families. And truly, it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we couldn't communicate through language very well, we managed to get along perfectly. Opposite us was an older couple with a lush garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama-san, and she had us helping her garden whenever she could coax us over with green tea and chocolate banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else actually. We lived in a wonderful neighborhood. The only drawback to Mama-san's home, however, was that she directly overlooked the cemetery, and that cemetery was unlike any one that I'd ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials didn't happen very often. Instead, above-ground crypts are built, many of them built into the sides of the hills that make up the island itself. The crypts are large, made of huge arcs of polished stone, set over a large square of that stone, which has a square insert cut into the middle of it for the coffin to be placed inside. Once inside the square is inset with another piece of polished stone, leaving a kind of shelf on the outside, so offerings can be made to lost loved ones. Yin, food, flowers, and incense are some of the offerings that are given. Below Mama-san's house was a valley, and swooped back up onto another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills were covered with these crypts and spiderwebbing. Up and down through the crypts were various stone-step pathways that were old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama-san asked me to come visit with her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me, as the older brother. Intrigued and a bit proud, I readily agreed. She took me to the back of her garden and sat me on a thick wooden bench that was carved with scenes of fishermen and men with swords, and told me that she had a story to tell. Mama-san then disappeared for a few minutes, and soon returned with a tray that held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colors of the evening sky as the sun began to lower. Mama-san said that she had seen me, my brother, and some other kids daring each other to follow a stairway path down into the cemetery. You have to understand, the path from our little home area down to the cemetery consisted of hundreds of steps, many broken or cracking, in and out of bushes, and at a steep incline. It would be dangerous for anyone, but the real test was seeing how long we could take the walking through the crypts at night. Mama-san wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. You see, many years ago, during the war, Americans were thought to be devils, monsters that would murder innocent children for no reason other than to kill. That fear was the product of wartime propaganda used to encourage young men in the military service and farmers to fight alongside them. But many didn't. Many ran. And with nowhere to go and nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens hurled themselves off a cliffside rather than face torture at the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified at just hearing this. I had no idea this had happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness that I started to cry. The sun was setting, and the sky went from pink and blue to a deep orange and red. Mama-san reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry, that this was the past, and the past is something we must always remember so we never go back. Then she went on with her story. One young woman had followed through this sacrifice with her 2 children, but she survived the fall. She was in a coma for months, and when she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realize that she wasn't with her children. They had been buried somewhere in that cemetery below, in an unmarked crypt that held many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain, the torment of her loss unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say that she never did find her children. Her act of suicide doomed her to purgatory, and she would remain tortured for all eternity. By now the sun had disappeared, and the cemetery drowned in inky blackness, the main path dotted with dim broken lights, feebly illuminating small areas. Mama-san continued. She still wanders that cemetery, she said, looking for her kids, and if you listen, you can hear her crying. And then she pointed down. I really didn't want to look, but I did. I looked. And there, in the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, was a white figure. At first, a bright white shimmer, moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side like it was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. Softly at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was completely terrified, and I wanted to run, but Mama-san held my hand and whispered that she wouldn't come up here. We were too far away, but that is why we shouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to just stay away. It's best to stay away and pray for her. Mama-san said she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she'll find her salvation. Needless to say, I never went down to that cemetery. Not once. And I never sat back there with Mama-san again either. That once was enough for me. I did, however, visit Suicide Hill. It's called Peace Prayer Park now, out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there, and I prayed for all the souls and for forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories and sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people was overwhelming. I'll never forget my time there. Someday I'd like to go back, just to see if she's still there, wandering the graves looking for her children. Thanks for taking the time to read this, Biker. Signed, Brian.
And there it is. My 3 favorite true ghost stories from viewers. I really hope you enjoyed hearing these as much as I enjoyed reading them. I'm always eager to hear your thoughts about these in the comments down below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have a strange experience or an unexplained encounter that, well, you'd like to share, just send it to the email address in the description and, well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for riding with me tonight. Happy Halloween. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the roadways. Biker out.